Hello and welcome to another Coffee with Developers. I'm sitting down here late night in Berlin. It's cold outside, but it's actually quite nice for the person that I'm talking to. I'm very excited today to introduce you Justin Kitagawa from Twilio, and he's the VP of Engineering. How are you doing today, Justin?
Hi, Chris. Pleased to meet you, and thank you for having me on.
This is excellent. So let me just get started with that. Like Twilio has been around for a long, long time. I ran into you at every conference that I've been at, and then it got a bit silent about you. But it seems like you've been super busy in the background to become an integral part for a lot of people when it comes to logging in, when it comes to validating what they're doing. What is Twilio's main job right now, and what is your main goal for inside that company right now?
Twilio is a communication platform, first and foremost, right? And our goal is to empower amazing digital communications for our customers. So we are largely used by companies, and I would wager that almost every person that's listening to this podcast has received either an SMS, an email, or a voice phone call from us. My responsibility is I am responsible for our console and API experiences. So, console and API experiences are responsible for all web traffic that's coming in, whether or not that's like machine API traffic or human scale people traffic going to our consoles. Under my remit are our authentication and authorization systems, our edge gateways, our webhooks infrastructure. So really the entire life cycle of if you're using Twilio, you're going through our systems.
Excellent. So it's basically it's the things that it feels like plumbing behind the services that actually allow you to connect, to log in, and make these things work. And it's always tricky to get known doing that. Like it's the kind of thing people only know about you when you fall apart or when you're not available. It's a bit like Cloudflare, isn't it?
Yes, it's exactly right. I am a platform. I'm a platform leader, right? And so I'm very well accustomed to not necessarily be in the limelight. At the same time, I've built a reputation within Twilio for just being largely my teams and myself, right, for being very operationally focused and operationally strong because we need to have really high availability. Our SLOs are 5 nines for availability and 6 nines for success rate.
So you talk about console. That confused me because I used to be the product manager of the developer tools of Chromium in Microsoft. So I worked on the developer console. I also know my console. What does console mean in the world of Twilio?
This is our administrative console that all Twilio users utilize to configure Twilio. So when you first sign up for Twilio, your first experience with Twilio is through the developer console. So you log in and you are given an account. And from that account, you will provision API keys. And with those API keys, then you'll be able to programmatically use Twilio to send your text message, to initiate a phone call, to send an email.
I'm a big fan of APIs. I'm also very, very sad that so many APIs are going away, like especially the open APIs that we used to have. Like, I mean, when Twitter started, it was completely API driven. We had access to almost everything in YouTube and these kind of things. You seem to be a company that offers an API and makes sure that there's a high availability in that API. So, what is your idea of approaching the API space? Is it more like we have to move fast and create new features all the time, or to make sure that people who are reliant on the product actually are not having to learn too much? And how do you get people? Were there any breaking changes in the last few years, and how did you communicate that to people?
That's a great question. So first and foremost, Twilio is a platform company. So our customers are other companies that are utilizing us, right? And the way in which they utilize Twilio is through APIs. So the API really is our product. We have a saying that trust is the number one thing we sell. It is imperative that our APIs are available and that our platform is available. With platforms, you never know the ways in which people will utilize the platform. And we actually have customers that are using us for mission critical systems. And in certain use cases, we are a suicide prevention line, right? So if that phone call doesn't come through, perhaps somebody does not get the needed support that they're seeking in that moment, right? So we take every HTTPS call very, very seriously that comes in through our systems. We absolutely, it's important that we have backward compatibility. In certain cases, we have customers that have embedded their APIs in hardware devices. And in those scenarios, it's not something that is very easy, or it's at times a very painful and expensive process for them to go and upgrade their API calls. So it's imperative that we go and make sure that we have a versioning system that supports that. We will never break a customer's API call. If we do introduce a new breaking change, it's always with a major version upgrade.
So it feels like a progressive enhancement, like the feature set is always there that people rely on, but if there's a new feature, it comes on as a new functionality, as a new API endpoint, as a different SDK, but doesn't override what's already existing.
That's exactly right. There's always ways in which you can make sure that you're adding attributes to particular resources, um, and making sure that we can introduce new endpoints if we're kind of introducing new functionality. But keeping the existing functionality working is a contract that we abide by, and we make sure that our customers have a trusted platform that they can rely on.
So in your world, what makes a good developer API?
First off, you want to make sure that it's composable. We like to think of Twilio as building blocks, as Lego blocks. And just as with when you go to to a Lego store, right, you can buy a kit, but you can also build the kit that kind of exists, right? And at the same time, you can also have individual Lego blocks in which you're able to build really anything in which you care to build. And so, first and foremost, it's being able to decompose and compose a meaningful platform primitive. And so, for instance, with Twilio, we first started with um, phone calls. So, being able to initiate a telephone call. And so, the platform, though, doesn't always just extend with the actual API call itself, right? So we have an API call to initiate a phone call. If you're having a conference call, you're able to add participants to that call. But we're trying to break it down into an abstraction and composable building blocks that we believe makes sense for customers to be able to piece together the way in which that they want to interact. Now, this also extends over into the way that Twilio is programmatic is that when a phone call is sent to a phone number, for instance, we will send out a webhook to the customer, and the customer then will listen for that webhook. And even within the webhook, there is a response. There's information that's transmitted to over the webhook request, and then customers will then send a response. And then that response is what we call TWIML, so Twilio XML. And even within that, there are building blocks there, right? So there will be a verb, say, um, that will be able to, you can specify text, you can go give it an MP4 file, right? And this, or an MP3 file, and that's a way in which you're able to play a sound, right? There's ways that you can collect the input, like the key presses and such, right? And this is the way that you can make an interactive voice recognition system like an IVR. And so once again, we think about building these composable Lego bricks and then giving them to our customers. And what's amazing about having a platform is that you don't know all the use cases in which people are going to like utilize the platform, and you're always, in fact, surprised when you go and meet with customers, and you're finding novel ways in which our customers are utilizing us.
Yeah, I've had the same in working on developer tools and working on other platforms. How do you deal with the huge influx of feature requests? There's a lot of people that have a specific need for their company only, and they want an API for that. Like, what is the linchpin here? Like, when do you start saying like, yeah, that makes a lot more sense, or is there a lot of bespoke development happening?
That's a great question. I think first off is, and this is just a certain facet of product management, right? If somebody says we need I need a button, or I have to move a button, and there's a certain feature that I want, right? We don't go out and just go build the button. I think the first thing is to we have a saying at Twilio: wear the customer's shoes. And what that means is that really understanding the why in which the request is coming in from. So even in our, our PIR processes, so like if this is we have an incident, you have 5 whys, right? Like why did this occur? Why did that thing occur? And I think you have to do the same thing on the product side too. Like what, and really asking what, like what is the intent of this? Like what are we really trying to kind of get to? And then keep peeling that onion to kind of go and understand what is the core thing that a customer is trying to do. And then from that course thing, then taking a look and seeing, okay, how does this apply to the existing primitives that exist at Twilio? And and then making sure that we do it. So no, we don't necessarily, we absolutely listen to our customers. In fact, all feedback from our customers is a gift. It's very important though that we don't just necessarily go take exactly what customers have given us, and we go and make sure that we find the root intent. I have an ethos that I really try to impart on my teams, and that is to focus on impact over features. Oftentimes, you'll find yourselves, especially in software development, focusing on building features. And so an organization can really get caught up in being a feature factory. We're just building feature after feature after feature. And there's a disconnected process where the developers don't necessarily even know what this feature is for or why they're building it. And so starting with the why are we building this? Understanding the customer, what are they trying to do? What is the intent? And ultimately making sure that whatever we're building, we know who the customer is we're building it for, and we're going to be measuring the impact of that feature, because just if we build it and nobody uses it, I mean, who cares, right? Like ultimately you're trying to build something that's super impactful for people.
Yeah, I remember the 3 why technique originally was Toyota, wasn't it? It was the first company that did that in the 1970s or something, where it was about like workers' help, like where people got hurt and they're like, why did it happen? Why did it happen? And then they
Yeah,
realized they have to change something in the machine, and you up that to 5, so that's even better. So
yeah.
that's not good. It's not a bad idea. It's the same we had in Microsoft when it was the unmet customer need. Customers have a lot of questions, but it's your job to actually take them in and then ask another question to find the source of that thing. Like just because they want that feature because a product that is in a competitor of yours has it is not a good way to actually put a feature in. But I think the good thing that you said before is that you have primitives and that your platform has these Lego bricks that you can put together. That if there's a new request, it probably means just putting 3 old Lego bricks together to make a new feature.
Yeah. Ideally, that is kind of like what we come to, right? And I mean, that's the ideal of what we try to go for, right? And there have been cases where Twilio has implemented a feature, right? But in general, that's what kind of like the way we think of it and the way we strive to be.
What were mistakes that you made? I mean, we all give them. It's there's no shame in it. And how did you learn from them? What did you do to not make these mistakes again?
I think that there was a period at Twilio where we started to become too siloed. It really, to a certain extent, when Twilio first started, it started as a voice, as Twilio voice, right? And then we soon added the Twilio messaging. And then when I joined over 11 years ago, we started to really expand on the number of channels. Twilio video became a thing, right? We bought SendGrid, and that gave us kind of email. We bought Segment, and that gave us a CDP. And we went through a time period in which each of those different channels and companies were effectively their own thing. Conway's Law is very real, right? And so your product will start to emulate the ways in which you're organizationally structured and the communication structures within it, right? And so I think that there was a period where we started to become siloed. And the way that we started to rectify this is one, starting to acknowledge like, no, the most important thing is, and our power is for Twilio to be a platform and for us to really be thinking globally, not necessarily like within um, each individual kind of silo, right?
Hmm. I think it's interesting with the acquisition of SendGrid, you've got the whole spectrum. And I think it's an interesting thing to do an acquisition rather than trying to play with that market as well, to actually understand, to have somebody who's completely ingrained in that. Because the idea of having a call platform is great, but more and more we need calls for two-factor authentication. We need SMS together with emails to verify each other, sending the webhook makes a lot of sense because then I, as a developer, don't need to do anything on the back end. I can just see like, okay, my interface can refresh when the SMS came in. That's a great offer to have. So, how do you see that whole thing? Like, it feels like so anachronistic to think about voice, but at the same time, there's still so many things dependent on them, right?
You know what is a very interesting use case that's caused our voice to explode, a usage to explode in the last years is AI. And with AI introducing, um, uh, really, we want to create amazing digital experiences. And I don't know about you, Chris, but one of the worst things that you can ever do um, is go and try to contact customer support of a big organization, right? Like we all dread that. Oh wow, I just my flight, I missed my flight, and I got to call the airline for that flight. And in the past, I think that that's been a real pain point, right? Hey, I'm on hold, waiting to kind of get hold of a representative for potentially hours, right? I think we've all kind of experienced that scenario, right? And there are companies, and some of them Twilio customers, right, that I feel that have really changed the game of how to kind of go about having an amazing customer experience, insofar as having seamless handoffs between a voice phone call to an SMS message to an asynchronous chat, using AI to effectively route people and actually get, in certain cases, being able to solve kind of the low hanging fruit support cases that are coming in. Really, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's how do you communicate with your customers? And the telephone still continues to endure as a very effective way to communicate with customers, right? And so SMS and voice still continue to be very powerful channels for us.
Hmm. I saw that IKEA now has a rotary dial phone that you can pair with your mobile phone to actually use. And this feels like the weirdest thing to me, coming as a kid of the 80s who used to do like phone freaking and all kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah, I was very happy when I had a digital line rather than like an acoustic line with all the errors that are in there. But yeah, it seems to be like a thing that goes back. Today I had an issue where I had my credit, my card for my health insurance, the free health insurance we have here. It's not working anymore, so I had to get a new one. And of course, it was two-factor authentication to my insurer. And it said like, okay, I'm going to send you an SMS, and it took 2.5 hours for the SMS to come. This, and then of course it was not valid anymore because it normally is after 5 minutes it times out. So these are the reliability issues where it gets really annoying. So how do you tackle reliability and downtime, and what does it mean for you? How can
It's, a
you
gr-
how can you prevent things like happening?
it's a great question. I would love to know what you're providing in this particular application. I am going to bet that they are not using Twilio because we have a very strict um, uh, um, carrier relations across the globe. And in fact, what we have seen is that customers at times will go and leave Twilio, and then they come back to us because of our reliability. Um, that we have really built up amazing relationships and with our telecom carriers across the globe. And we have what's called our super network. And we view it as a great asset for us, is the way in which we are able to kind of go and route all telecommunications across the globe.
But how do you deal with that in terms of the engineering mindset in your company? How does it deal with like training on the job? Like how do people get into that mindset to make sure that downtime doesn't happen?
I think that first and foremost, as I was saying, trust is the number one thing we sell, and that's something that is really instilled at all levels of the company. And so all of Twilio R&D, it's very valued to have, first off, an operations mindset. Um, while there are the bright, shiny features, um, keeping Twilio up is job number one, right? And so, with an operations mindset, I think there's a couple things that go with this. First off, is engineering and product alignment. When you have a product manager, a product management leadership, and engineering leadership that aren't aligned on business objectives, for instance, hey, product person, I want the bright shiny feature. Engineering, your responsibility is uptime and availability. Right there, you're kind of setting the two leaders that are supposed to be collaborating together, working together, um, at odds on whether their business goals are. So first off, both product and engineering acknowledge that operations is really important. We measure, monitor, review. So weekly, our teams meet and go and take a look at all of our dashboards, and we have a set of um, uh, dashboards that we kind of review as an R&D group every week. Like VPs go and meet, and we talk through incidents, talk about any SLO breaches, talk through open betterments and such, right? And then ultimately, operations is a team sport. This isn't just an exercise that's happening at the top. You mentioned how do you go and make sure that all levels, from a VP to a director to a senior engineering man or to an engineering manager to an individual contributor to an IC, you're participating in ops reviews. You know the dashboards. You know kind of why, and are reviewing this on a weekly basis. Operationally, when we are deploying things, right? A lot of changes will be as a result of deployments. Deployment of whenever you have an incident and it's um, your first recourse is to look, was there a deployment in this area that happened anytime? recently? And if so, roll it back. But some I guess more finer points of that is just I really emphasize small batches. So making sure that only small changes. I do not like big bang events, right? So we never go from like 0 to 100% for all of our customers. That is a sub-zero waiting to happen, right? So we really focus on incremental deployments, 0.5%, 1%, 5%, 10% of traffic, slowly rolling out changes. If uh, Other times, if we are introducing new infrastructure, we'll start traffic shifting. So we'll take 1% of traffic, 2% of traffic, and slowly start shifting the traffic over to the new. And at times just be running 50-50 on both of that infrastructure to make sure that it's everything's holding up. And then I guess the last thing is just to, as a engineering and are as an engineering leader, you just have to assume failure. We process billions of requests a day. And so the 1 in a million, the 1 in a billion event is literally daily, right? And so we have to remove human error. So that's in the form of automated test suites and deployment pipelines. Um, We've really been investing in a concept called cellularization at Twilio. And so that really means that there are individual cells. And so and everything is isolated. So if there is a hardware issue in one particular cell, or an issue in one particular cell, it does not affect 100% of your traffic. And then ultimately, one thing as well is your data is always, or data storage is one of the hardest jobs at scale. And so we really are mindful about control plane and traffic, and then the data path, so traffic, right? And you want to make sure that those are separated, and you want to make sure that ideally in the hot path that you're not making database calls. So we've got multiple levels of caching that are kind of all the way up, so we can sustain database outage.
Now, last time on the show, I had Daniel Steinberg, who is the inventor of curl and the maintainer of curl, which goes
So
back to
cool.
like pure HTTP requests. But it seems like in a world like yours, where it becomes really problematic to, or where it becomes really complex at times, I think SDKs are the more approach to do these kind of things. Like, do you find that developers want to go hardcore on HTTPS, or do they expect an SDK to start from these days?
First off, that's amazing that you're able to kind of speak. That's amazing. I feel anytime that you're able to meet with a founder of just core technology, like I know that I've had the good fortune of being able to meet Bjorn Strustrup, the creator of C++, and James Gosling, the creator of Java, and that is a definitely a geek fandom. Being able to kind of go and meet somebody like that, right? In terms of while we are SDK based, we actually spend a lot of time thinking about HTTPS, what is going over the wire, because like first and foremost, that is the contract, right? The SDK is somewhat of an embodiment of that, but first and foremost, you have to be thinking of the HTTPS contract, right? I will say that our customers largely use SDKs. So they'll just go and download one of the official SDKs and start utilizing it. That doesn't mean that they're not looking at the documentation, which is in kind of, we start with the HTTPS and then just show like, okay, this is how you go and then utilize an SDK to kind of go and do that, right? One of the things though, that what we do, one of the challenges that we've had in the past is to try to really keep our HTTP, our SDKs, and our documentations in sync. And that has been something that has when I first joined Twilio, our SDKs, we had they're written in 6 different languages, and these are their server-side SDKs that communicate with our REST APIs. And at that time, each one was kind of handcrafted, and the company was founded by builders and developers, right? And so there wasn't really strong ownership of the SDKs. And so what would happen is if somebody was really passionate about C++ or Python or Ruby, and then they introduced a new feature, they'd kind of introduce that, and then maybe they didn't know um, Java, so they didn't introduce it there. And
Mhm.
so then you started to get a very fragmented experience where not all of the APIs are surfaced in all the SDKs. And then another converse challenge that occurred is that because it was handcrafted and artisanally maintained, you would actually, within a given language SDK, things would not be done consistently. And so the way in which you would call things, it could be done one way in one part of the SDK, and it could be done a different way as like like as for newer functions and such, right? And so what we decided is that what's the most important thing is that we need to have a declarative representation of our API. And once we have that declarative representation of the API, then we're able to do some really neat things with it. And so at Twilio, we have open API specs for every single API. And then from that, we have annotated those API specs, and we're able to generate helper libraries in 7 languages, and then in addition to kind of Terraform. And then in addition to that, it's also used to help generate our API documentation and examples. And so this is a way that we keep it all in sync between HTTP, SDKs, and our documentation.
Which also allows the end user or your customers then to switch from one language to another without any incident at all. Like if they want to upgrade from a Java environment to a Rust environment or PHP or Perl or whatever they want to go for, it's as it's done with the API. It's a very clever way of doing it. It's a bit like how browsers work. We take the W3C specs and then actually build the browser accordingly to make sure that actually it will not never break, because you cannot break the experience of the end user, because you're always to blame anyways, so you might as well do it right. So I guess that's the thing that's going on there. Like you talked about the console, like that used to be just a control pane for people, but it seems to be so much more these days, right? Well, how did that evolve over time, and how much complexity came with that for you?
Well, I think that when we first started, largely like let's say 2008, right, when the company first started, we were a startup, and so we had a bunch of other startups that we're using, and so we would be largely independent developers that were logging in and utilizing the console. And as I kind of articulated before, the same areas were important. I need to kind of grab my API keys. I need to kind of go and be able to maybe see the logs on, is my webhook failing, right? What has changed is, and as the company has grown from a startup to now we're a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, and is just our customers as well. We now have very large organizations and ISVs that are utilizing us, right? So it's really been a shift from, let's say, um, indie devs to enterprises. And so, what are the things that are like necessary there, right? Well, first off, we need to make sure that there is RBAC, and there's more security features that are there, right? We're going to have to make sure that um, we have different views for the different levels of users and such. So really, ultimately, we need to make a console that is going to be able to support still the indie devs, but also all of the ways in which um, um, an enterprise is first off organized so that they don't have just like one person that's doing everything, right? Now, oftentimes they have multiple. sub-organizations that are going out, right? Like, so perhaps marketing is using Twilio, and then engineering is using Twilio, or perhaps one division of a company is using Twilio. So how do you go and make sure that we can create um, uh, um, um, systems that have the appropriate access controls so that people can kind of go and get the views and restrictions that they want?
And how do you stay cool and at the same time trustworthy for enterprise? That's the big issue there. I guess moving from XML to JSON is one thing for both, like Java and Python and like all the bits and bobs. It's interesting though to see that change in a company. Like, were you part of that, or did you come in when it became like an enterprise customer, or did you still get that feeling from the startup thing in there?
I want to say that I came in as it was as the transition was occurring. So definitely we still had the like I know that the first time I heard of Twilio or saw Twilio, I remember just being at a meetup, and it was miraculous. Wow, there was just some code and then you made the phone call. Like, and it's something now that is so obvious and just commonplace that now it's just accepted.
It
um,
felt too good to be true. It felt like something that before that you had to do with every single mobile phone provider. You had to get SDKs from all of them, and out of a sudden there was one service in between that felt like a proxy that actually did the thing for you. And I had the same experience. I'm like, okay, I can make calls now. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I mean we really were just there was that focus on simplicity, right? 3 lines of Python, and you can go and send a text message. 3 lines of Python, you're able to like initiate a phone call, right? Like that was really powerful. And if you were really the target audience that the company was targeting at the point was web developers. And so prior to this, you needed to be a telecom engineer to be able to kind of go program the boxes needed to kind of go and make that functionality exist. But now it's just in a very 3 lines of code: import, initiate your API key, and then go and make the call, right? And it just was so readable. It still is so readable, but like it captured the minds of everything. We still want to maintain that. And then as you move forward into the enterprise, go and make sure that you have maybe the constructs around that so that you're able to still have that, what we like to say, that the Twilio magic moment when like the light bulb goes off in somebody's head of how they can like utilize Twilio. But we still need to kind of make sure that we have all the enterprise constructs around it to be able to support those enterprises.
So when we talked earlier, one thing you said that really made me happy, being a writer myself and being somebody who has been documenting things my whole life, that documentation to you is a first-class product. There's so many companies right now that think like, okay, documentation can be done by code comments and then it generates itself, or we ask an LLM to look at our code and actually generate the docs because nobody reads docs. But it seems you have a different approach to that in your company, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is I mean, there is an element that is like generate. I was talking about kind of like with our APIs, and at the same time, no, our product managers and work alongside with kind of like documentation to make sure that so for instance, our step-by-step guides, copy, paste, run snippets, right? Clear what and why explanations. We fundamentally believe that the happiest developers are self-service customers. Good docs prevent support tickets. So it's in our best interest to kind of go and make sure that our docs are accurate and working, right? Um, Developers bounce between the code console and docs constantly. And this is why we really base our docs off of like our APIs. And we try to embed reference and snippets wherever we can. And in the age of AI, our docs also become super, super critical, right? Like those what kind of like what teaches the LLMs to be able to kind of go and effectively vibe code Twilio, right? For customers.
Yeah, and that's where the Hello World examples were a horrible idea in the past because a lot of them got indexed, and a lot of I see a lot of like auto completion when I do vibe coding or when I just let the machine do some stuff, and I'm like, yeah, this gives me the how, but not the why. And this is where I always told people when it comes to examples in your documentation, this has to be the best code you've ever written. This has to be something that assumes that everything is broken and that people will do some horrible stuff with it, and make sure that your code that you put in your documentation is probably easy to understand, very simple, might be more verbose than you could have written it, but it explains itself that way. And I think this is where a really good clean code should go. In production, it's fine to actually take shortcuts because sometimes the performance needs to be better. But the idea of having code in production, in documentation that was from production and just is like, yeah, ASCII source makes no sense to me. And it's very depressing to see how many really good writers or like documentation writers in companies are being laid off right now and replaced by an AI thing. But it's good to see somebody care about that much more because, as you said, if I find it in the docs, I'm not going to pester you.
100%.
So when it comes to the AI and agents, do you have like formal partnerships with people, or are you in the same boat as we, as that there's like random bots coming around scraping our stuff and we don't know what's going on? Do you send information to these companies, or do you have an endpoint for it, or is it just like that people will scrape your website and index those things anyways?
We definitely have partnerships with companies, right? We also have, we also do a kind of think what everyone else kind of like does in terms of like making sure like who can scrape us and such, right? We can't control like who connects to Twilio and such, right? Um, One thing that maybe just to kind of shift some of the just the thoughts on AI, right? Like, is that as AI chatbots become more online, one of the things that Twilio is really thinking about, right, is back to kind of like that security element, is how do we go and make sure that we have proper playgrounds and sandboxes and authorization for agents. So I think that that's kind of like super interesting, and it's a super interesting problem. So as if you think about, let's say, a chat bot or an AI agent that's embedded in your particular product, um, how do you make sure that if you're asking that bot to go and do something for you, how do you make sure that you have the appropriate permissions that are going to be granted, ideally just for a very narrow use case to that particular bot, instead of like giving effectively uh, pseudo access to a bot that it's non-deterministic, right? You wouldn't do that to a human. Why would you do that to a piece of technology? So how do you go and make sure, um, like even right now, Claudebot, right? Like Claudebot goes onto your laptop and is basically got pseudo access and then sending out messages on your behalf, right? Which could be cool. And it's also, I think every chief security officer's worst nightmare. That's potentially something that's on people's laptops. And so, how do you go and make sure that there is the appropriate uh, controls in place, and that there is a certain notion of, hey, I'm granting you this functionality, narrow set of scoped functionality for a restricted time period on behalf of me, and we've got some sort of chain of command that we know that this person that like you've granted that access. Those are the type of things that Twilio's been thinking about.
It's tricky though, isn't it? I mean, as you said, like it feels like CH modding 777 your whole machine to the world out there. And it's just people do it because they like to play with the cool new stuff, and then they wonder when their Claude bill is like $50,000 in the first week, and you're like, okay, that's not surprising. But even worse, even more worrying, I played with Quen 3 TTS the other day. That basically you record your voice and then you give it a sentence, and then it says like clone that voice, and it's an open source an open source model that I can run on my own machine. I can run on my MacBook, and it actually does an okay job. It doesn't get the intonation quite right yet, but for English or other simple languages, holy cow, it's really, really fascinating. Like, how do we work with that, with voice as an authentication in a world where things can be cloned within a second?
One of the things that Twilio has been really investing in is to make sure that we have trusted communication lines. So, for instance, from a company, we have the way in which you are able to make sure that your phone number is coming from like a trusted brand, and there has to be a way in which you're able to kind of just know, like, in the future, I believe that you're not going to accept phone in the same way that a phone number from a random phone number, oftentimes you're very skeptical of it, even if it's and so we have the ability right now to kind of make sure we have trusted calls from a particular company, and you'll see on your phone that is this coming from, like, let's say, um, company X, right? That you kind of work through that, and then just making sure that when you see that you have trust that that's actually coming from customer X, because it's kind of going all the way from there's been a KYC or know your company that's happened to kind of ensure that this is actually a phone number that's owned by this customer, and there's no other way that you're able to spoof that because it's gone
Hmm.
all the way through the telecom.
Okay, that's an interesting one. I mean, there's also we work with Camara and like other open communication bodies that actually come up with all kind of things to make one number a verification as well, which comes from a trusted source in this case then. And it's a fascinating world, I think, because it's like I've got a landline here that came with my internet access. I've given that telephone number to nobody. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I always get like 4 or 5 calls that pretend to be PayPal with a very robotic voice asking me to make sure that I'm actually pressing one to speak to one of their customers. And you're like, you just want to put up a honeypot and send them somewhere evil. But it's just a matter of like in the past, fraud on telephone was so cheap because you basically could send out 10,000 calls easily. But I think it's a matter of like that we start to harden that part of the infrastructure more, because it's the two-factor thing that makes sure the other bit is safe as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Tricky to find partners though to basically do that, because it's like people just want free stuff, and when you don't use your SIM card for like 2 years, the number gets resent to somebody else in Europe. And that's another big interesting thing, that like out of a sudden you get like calls from somebody else, you're like, well, that's not my number anymore, but okay. So what is the things that you would love developers to start do with Twilio? Like, how can people challenge you? How can people make you more interesting? Do you need help with security testing? Do you need help with API ideas? What do you want our audience to actually do for you and with you?
First off, if you haven't ever used Twilio and you're a developer, I really would urge you to start to kind of explore Twilio. And moving forward, I think that there's like a lot of possibilities that are kind of emerging right now with AI. As always, if there's any ideas that you have for either products or ways in which we can kind of make our product better for developers, I'd love to hear from you. I'm available on LinkedIn. And yeah, I'm happy to be able to share at least my perspective with you, Chris, today.
So you admitted that you're actually generating your SDKs from your API specs. Do you do that by hand, or do you do that with an LLM already?
Um, uh, well, no, we've developed a transpiler. Um,
Okay.
so effectively, we take our open API specs and then overlay that. A lot of the API can be generated from the base API specs, and then what we do is that there's kind of like a base that it kind of like overlays on top of, right? There's like a generated part, and then there's kind of like maybe like a more handcrafted part, right? And so that's kind of things, right? So it's a
And it's
transpiler. It's a system that we
okay.
built.
And of course,
LLM hasn't been involved in that facet of it.
yeah, it feels overkill, doesn't it? I mean, if there's input that is already structured, then you don't need it because you just need a converter kind of thing. And of course, it goes through like all the unit testing and all the bits and bobs to basically automate it, going in there to make sure that it actually works. So yeah, this was great. So thanks very much for a bit of insight in what you do and how much of it is actually there. So what is the most scary amount of traffic that you ever had to deal with? Was there ever a big like DDoS thing that you got called at 3 o'clock in the morning to fix, or were you lucky enough to actually not have these issues yet?
I think that one of the early on at Twilio, there was a time when I this is it was called the Justin Bieber incident, where Justin Bieber had grabbed a telephone, like a 10-digit long code, and there are limits that you can go of how much traffic that you can send on a 10-digit long code versus what we call a short code. And at the time, they just had taken a 10-digit long code, and he just shared out his number.
Okay.
And this is when Justin Bieber was like kind of like one of the biggest pop stars on the planet, right? And this is early on in Twilio, right? And that definitely caused we were not prepared for the scale. Like, we pride ourselves a lot on making sure that we have the appropriate DDoS protection on both kind of like our API and our web fronts, right? And we rely um, um, just the on with our partners and cloud partners, right? Cloud infrastructure partners, to kind of go and make sure that we have the appropriate rule sets to kind of go and protect against that. So for instance, like we don't allow API traffic from Tor exit nodes. We don't allow from like VPNs. If there's any known bad traffic or APs from bad traffic, we go and make sure that those that just effectively gets dev nulled before it comes into our system, right? Um, and in terms of yeah, sometimes you'll see the traffic that is getting shunted away, and at times it's like potentially even state level things, right? And
Mm.
so I feel relying on kind of like I guess our cloud and as trusted partners with our cloud infrastructure providers, right? Um, we make sure that like we're kind of doing everything that is possible to kind of make sure that once again that trusted number thing that we're doing, and we got to make sure that we're up and available.
Cool. Well, thanks very much. This was great. This was insightful. Now, big question: are you hiring? Do you want to get people?
We are always hiring. If you go to twilio.com, there's always opportunities, and yes, jobs are available.
Berlin, do you have a Berlin office? I don't think so. Well, thanks very much, Justin. This was Justin Kitagawa from Twilio on like APIs and how you get started. So you got a bit of insight of how that thing works that empowers you to write 3 lines of code to do a call. Thanks very much, Justin, and thanks for listening. And we see you soon at another Coffee with Developers.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you very much,
Justin.
Chris. Bye bye. Thank you.